Hello, welcome to Air Job Boss TV. I'm the Air Job Boss, and this is pilot interview general information, kind of like general information. We'll get to that in a moment. But if you enjoy the content of Air Job Boss TV, please subscribe, like if you please can, because that helps spread the word. Also, if you find this information interesting to other people, please share it as well. Comment below if there is a question you'd like me to answer, or if you disagree with something I say, or if you have a comment, please comment. I'm always interested in seeing where your mind's at and what kind of inputs you have for Air Job Boss TV. Today we're going to go over this. What to say when you don't have an answer to the question. Now, there are several different types of questions that they're going to ask you. Some are technical in nature, yeah. Some are situational or in nature, like tell me about a time or what would you do if. And some are scenario based, where they're giving you a scenario like you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this, the airplane's doing that, what would you do? Okay, so we're going to go over those three topics now. Technical in nature, this is like, okay, tell me when an alternate airport is required. Hopefully you are prepared for technical questions like that. There is a plethora of resources that I use, that I know you use, to find the possible technical questions that you may or may not get asked on a particular interview. So please scour the internet for those, and you can also contact me for one-on-one preparation, and I have a vast list based on the airlines, what you're going to be asked, of course. So technical questions. If you don't know the answer to that question, it is best to say offhand, I don't know. And then tell them where to find it. This information is listed in the FARs under Part 121 or under Part 91 or Part 64, 61, 97, 25, whatever it is. Or this is in the Airman's Operating Handbook, or this is in my company's flight operations manual, or this is in our operations manual. Okay, the reason why you need to tell them right away you don't know is because a pilot cannot proceed down a course of action thinking they know but not really knowing. They have to know when they do not know, and they have to know how to know. Yeah? So it's really a plus. You have to understand, when you get a question, a technical question like that you don't know, you're going to turn this into a plus, and you're going to keep yourself composed professionally. You're going to say, I don't know the answer to that question offhand. I have known it in the past, but I'm unsure. And it would be irresponsible of me to answer this question without knowing for sure. I know that it's listed under FAR Part 121, and this is where I'd find that information. It's also in my company's operating manual, and I would review that information prior to answering or making a flight plan based on that information. See how that goes? See what an impact that has, what that says about you, because no one knows everything. That's why they got all the books in your book bag. That's why they got the iPad filled with basically 10 to 20,000 pages of information, and they design it easily so you can find answers quickly. Turn that negative technical answer, the inability to answer the technical question, into a positive about who you are and how you would find that information, and you're not going to answer a question that you're not sure about. Now, hopefully you're only doing that about 30% of the time, because a lot of interviewers want to see a good 70% pass rate. So they might ask you something like 5 questions, and hopefully you get 4 of them correct. If you repeatedly don't know, there's not much excuse for that. You really do need to know. That's why preparation is so important. So you really do need to know your skill, and you do need to know your area of expertise, okay? But the best case scenario is you turn it into a positive, tell them you don't know. It would be irresponsible for me to answer the question and wing it. I don't wing things in my profession, but I do know where to find it, and this is where I'd find that information if it applied to me during line operation. Okay. Next thing is, tell me about a time. Now, in many cases, airline interviewers are aware that not every question you have been in. Tell me about a time you have had an emergency in the airplane. Well, Maybe a lot of people don't have an emergency in the airplane. And I will caution you, if they ask you this specific question, tell me about a time you had an emergency in an airplane, you have better declared an emergency, and you better tell them you declared an emergency somewhere along in that story, okay? Don't have an emergency and not have declared it to ATC. This is a responsibility of the pilot in command. Anytime the aircraft is threatened with an emergency, you must declare an emergency, okay? Under the circumstances, and you can look in the FARs and the Airman's Information Manual or Company Manual when you must declare an emergency, okay? And what is an emergency? I had a bird strike. It was a really emergency. Oh, really? What happened? Well, the bird struck the window and there's blood all over the window. Okay. Was the performance of the aircraft hindered? No. Did you have any injuries or fatalities? No. Was any of the major systems, were you down to one hydraulic source, one electrical source, blah, blah, blah? There is actually a classification of what exactly constitutes an emergency. And you don't want to say, oh, I had an emergency, I had a bird strike. Really, well, that doesn't necessarily categorize your incident as an emergency. But you can say something like this: well, it wasn't a bona fide emergency. As a matter of fact, it didn't comport with what an actual emergency is. But in my case, it was leaning toward an emergency. We didn't declare an emergency, but I had a bird strike right on the windshield. It was completely covered in blood. And it was quite startling. It didn't hamper it, and you can tell them the story, blah, 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 going through the STAR method and going about the tell me about a time when. But if you don't have an answer, they are completely aware that you're not going to have an answer. Now, try not to dodge the ones that are really general. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with another coworker. Don't say you've never had a conflict with a coworker. Now, it doesn't have to be like you're in the employee parking lot, fisticuffs, or you're at each other's throat in the cockpit, or you're throwing coffee at each other in the break room. It can be a small thing conflict. Well, this pilot wanted to accomplish the flight planning this way. I didn't think the flight level, the fuel plan, the routing was good. So I said, hey, this and that. You can tell them about a small conflict. It doesn't have to be a big conflict, but definitely address these types of general ones that generally everyone should have experienced. Tell me about a time you made a bad decision. Tell me about a time you had a bad customer service experience. Hopefully you have something. Now, if you do not come from the realm of that industry, for example, you're a military pilot flying single-seat fighter aircraft, and they say, tell me about a time you've had poor customer service experience. Well, it is natural to say, I drop bombs and break things, so I don't have any. My customers basically all have a bad experience if I'm doing my job correctly, right? So you can, now for an interviewer to ask a military fighter pilot this question would be a little odd. And you could probably say, well, my background is mostly military. We don't really deal with customer service. My wing commander is my customer, and he's been upset with me from time to time, but you can make light of it. And they'll know right away, and they're like, yeah, sorry, that one doesn't apply with you. And they'll simply move on to the next question. Tell me about a time you've had to make a critical decision in your aircraft. Yeah, they'll move on if it doesn't apply. So just say, if it's a tell me about a time that you don't know, just say, honestly, I don't have a situation that parallels that. Yeah. Do you have another question? Ask them, do you have another question? Yeah, and they'll be happy to answer you. They've got a list of 10, 20, 30 questions, and they don't care. They just need to get some of them answered, and they're going to test you one way or the other. Okay, scenario. This is okay. You're okay. Please imagine, this is the question. Please imagine this. You're on a flight. It's you, a captain, and a first officer, and you're going 150 miles. It's a very short flight, and you get airborne, and all of a sudden you lose hydraulic pressure in one hydraulic system. Do you continue the flight or not? Okay. Now, these you should have an answer for, yeah? But you may not know everything technically about, like oh, what kind of aircraft, how many hydraulic systems, what's the weather condition, do I have path, what am I flying, all those things. So you may decide that you don't really know much about it. So, and you don't have formulated an answer. So the best thing you can begin to do is ask questions about the scenario. And they will then fill in the gaps and make it a little bit easier for you to identify solutions to the scenario. So you say, well, am I VMC or IMC? Can I see the terrain and everything else? What kind of aircraft am I flying? Do I have other backup hydraulic systems on board? Is this passenger carrying operation? Is there performance issues associated with the landing runway or the runway that I've taken off from? Where is the maintenance base? Do I have the ability to call my company dispatch? Am I contacted? Do I have ATC? Is there a flight attendant in back? All these questions. And then they will actually begin to answer the question for you through the additional information that they provide, right? So if you, for example, you're airborne and you get the ATIS and you're now landing on a contaminated runway, which should be a dry runway, do you have the stopping distance? How do you determine that you're going to, be able to land safely on that runway? You say, well, what kind of airplane am I in? You're in a 737. Does it have an auto brake system? Yes, it has an auto brake system. So I assume that there's various intensities of that braking system, and there's recommendations by the company to use that braking system. Yeah, generally for contaminated runway, you set it on 3. Okay, then that's what I would do. I'd set it on 3. Also, I assume that there's different flap settings. Yeah. What is the short runway's recommendation for flap setting? Full flaps. Then I would use full flaps. Do I have a method of calculating landing distance? Yeah, there's an iPad program. Well, I'd make sure that I calculate the landing distance and I give it to my first officer and they calculate the landing distance and we come upon it and make sure we're getting the same number, and there might be any special requirements as far as touchdown. Now, is there an instrument approach? Yeah, there is an instrument. Then I would fly the instrument approach. You see, as long as you're asking questions about the scenario, you're discovering answers, and they will then picture your mind going through this problem-solving process, which is CRM, or threat and error management, the search for information from all kinds of sources, defining the threat, being aware of errors that could occur, and mitigating circumstances and gathering that information. That is really key. And when they ask you, if you could imagine if they asked you a scenario question like, okay, you're flying from point A to point B and you lose hydraulic pressure right in the middle. What do? Do you continue forward or you go back? Well, I would continue forward. I've lost hydraulic pressure before, and I would just continue forward. It's not a big deal, and I would land. And then they say, well, unfortunately, your flaps were inoperative, and that landing runway is actually very short, but your departure runway was very long. So maybe that was a bad decision. Yeah? Jumping the gun, not getting enough information, making a conclusion or a decision prior to gaining all the information from all the available ATC, weather, dispatch, flight attendant, first officer, company manuals, blah, blah. Yeah. So, all right, in review, technical questions. If you don't know the answer to a technical question, admit that you're wrong. Tell them that you're not gonna make decisions in the airplane or operational unless you know the proper answer, and this is where you find the answer. Tell me about a time. If you don't have a time, to say, you know what, I really don't have that specific answer. Do you have another scenario? Tell me about a time that I might be able to have a specific scenario which I've experienced. And 3, scenario-based. If you don't know the answer to it, ask questions, gain more information, and allow them to provide little bits of information to better formulate an answer. And by asking questions, you look like you're actively solving problems through the CRM and threat error management model. Okay, boom, that's it for Air Job Boss today. Thank you so much for joining me. Like, subscribe, comment if you will. We'll see you on the next video.